Have you ever felt small in the face of a giant problem? Or wondered where to find the courage to keep going? Imagine sinking into your pillow as the stories of ancient heroes remind you that strength and bravery are closer than you think. In this video, we journey through 8 timeless tales of courage and strength from the Bible, stories that whisper of faith, resilience, and the quiet power within us all. From young shepherds facing giants to unlikely warriors finding their strength, these stories will soothe your mind, comfort your heart, and remind you that even the most impossible battles can be won. Before we begin, can I ask if you could subscribe to our channel, please? This helps us grow and to spread the word of God. Also, it means you can join our awesome and growing community. Now, close your eyes. Take a deep breath, and let the gentle rhythm of these stories carry you to a place of peace, where courage lives, and giants fall. The story of David and Goliath. In a time long ago, the land of Israel was at war. The Israelite army, led by King Saul, was camped on one hill, while their enemies, the Philistines, stood on another. Between them stretched a wide, empty valley. The air was tense, filled with the sounds of clinking armor and whispered prayers. But the quiet of the valley was shattered each day by the same terrifying sound, a booming voice that echoed across the hills, shaking the hearts of the Israelite soldiers. It was the voice of Goliath, the Philistine champion, a giant who towered above all men. His armor gleamed in the sunlight, his bronze helmet heavy on his head. His legs were wrapped in thick armor, and a massive spear rested on his shoulder, its tip gleaming like a blade of iron. Each morning and each evening, Goliath stepped forward and shouted to the Israelites. His voice was deep and cruel, his words filled with scorn. "Why do you come out to line up for battle?" he roared. "Am I not a Philistine, and are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man to come down and fight me. If he is able to defeat me, we will be your servants. But if I overcome him, you will become our servants." His challenge hung in the air like a heavy cloud. No one dared to move. No one dared to speak. The men of Israel looked at Goliath and saw only his size, his strength, and the glint of his weapons. Fear wrapped itself around their hearts like cold chains. Even King Saul, the tallest and strongest man in Israel, felt his courage slip away each time he heard the giant's voice. For 40 days, Goliath's challenge went unanswered. Morning and night, his laughter rang through the valley, mocking the Israelites' fear. And each day, the army's hope grew dimmer. Far away from the battlefield, in the quiet hills of Bethlehem, a young shepherd named David tended his father's sheep. David was the youngest of 8 brothers, the smallest in his family. His days were spent in the fields, watching over the sheep, guiding them to fresh water, and protecting them from wild animals. He knew the hills like the back of his hand, and his sling was never far from his side. Though David was young, he was strong and brave. He had fought off lions and bears with nothing but his staff and his faith in God. When danger came, he stood his ground, knowing that he was never alone. The same God who made the sun rise and the stars shine watched over him. One day, David's father, Jesse, called him from the fields. "David," he said, "take this bread and cheese to your brothers who are with King Saul's army. See how they are doing and bring back word to me." David set out early the next morning. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting golden light over the hills. He walked with a spring in his step, his heart eager to see his brothers and hear news from the battlefield. When he arrived at the camp, the army was just lining up for battle. Shouts and clanging weapons filled the air. David hurried to find his brothers, and as he greeted them, he heard it, the voice of Goliath, louder and crueler than ever. "Choose a man to fight me." Goliath roared. "Are you also afraid? Is there no one in Israel with the courage to face me?" David's heart pounded. He saw the fear in the eyes of the soldiers, the way they shrank back and avoided looking toward the valley. Even his brothers, who had always seemed so brave and strong, looked helpless. "Why does no one answer him?" David asked. "Who is this Philistine to defy the armies of the living God?" His oldest brother, Eliab, turned to him with a scowl. "Why are you here, David? Shouldn't you be with the sheep in the fields?" You're just looking for trouble." But David didn't back down. He turned to the other soldiers and asked again, "Why are we letting this man dishonor God's people? What will be done for the man who defeats this giant?" The soldiers explained that King Saul had promised great rewards, riches, freedom from taxes, and even his daughter's hand in marriage, to the man who defeated Goliath. David's mind was set. He went to King Saul and said, "Let no one lose heart because of this Philistine. I will go and fight him." Saul looked at David, surprised and concerned. "You are only a boy," he said gently. "Goliath has been a warrior since his youth." But David's eyes shone with confidence. "I have fought lions and bears while tending my father's sheep," he said. "When a lion took a lamb, I struck it and rescued the lamb from its mouth. The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." Saul saw the fire in David's eyes and felt a glimmer of hope. "Go," he said at last, "and may the Lord be with you." Saul offered David his own armor, his heavy helmet, and his mighty sword. David tried to walk in them, but the armor was too big and too heavy. He shook his head. "I cannot wear these," he said. "I will fight with what I know." He took his staff, his sling, and 5 smooth stones from the brook. With each step into the valley, David's heart beat steadily. The air was thick with silence as the 2 armies watched him, a shepherd boy walking to meet a giant. Goliath saw David coming and laughed, his voice echoing across the valley. "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" he jeered. "Come here, and I will give your flesh to the birds and the beasts." David stood tall, his voice clear and strong. "You come to me with a sword and a spear, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts. Today, the Lord will deliver you into my hands. The whole world will know that there is a God in Israel." Goliath's laughter stopped. He took a step forward, his eyes burning with rage. The ground shook beneath his feet. David reached into his pouch and took out a stone. He placed it in his sling, took a deep breath, and began to swing it. Around and around the sling went, faster and faster, until the air hummed with its speed. Then, he let the stone fly. The stone soared through the air like a whisper, straight and true. It struck Goliath in the forehead. The giant's eyes widened in shock. He swayed, then fell to the ground with a thunderous crash. Silence fell over the valley. The Philistines stared in disbelief. The mighty Goliath lay still, defeated by a boy with a sling and a stone. David walked calmly to the giant's side, took Goliath's own sword, and made sure the battle was won. The Philistine army turned and fled, their courage gone. The Israelites shouted with joy and pursued their enemies. That day, David's courage showed the world that true strength comes not from size or weapons, but from faith. He trusted in God's power, and with that trust, he overcame the greatest giant of all. David returned home, not as a shepherd boy, but as a hero. Yet in his heart, he knew the victory belonged to God. And so, the story of David and Goliath has been told for generations, a reminder that with faith and courage, even the smallest among us can face the giants of this world and triumph. The story of Daniel in the lion's den. In the ancient kingdom of Babylon, there lived a man named Daniel. His story was one of faith, courage, and unwavering devotion. Even though Daniel was far from his homeland, he lived with a steadfast heart and a spirit full of trust in God. His days were guided by prayer, and his nights were wrapped in quiet reflection. He was wise beyond his years, with eyes that seemed to hold the light of heaven itself. Daniel had come to Babylon as a young man, taken from Jerusalem when his people were conquered. But even in this foreign land, among unfamiliar customs and strange gods, Daniel's faith remained pure and strong. He served the kings of Babylon with honesty, integrity, and wisdom. Through the years, his reputation grew, and now, under King Darius, Daniel was one of the most trusted advisors in the entire kingdom. King Darius was a powerful ruler, but he was also fair and just. He recognized Daniel's gifts and planned to promote him to the highest position in the kingdom, second only to the king himself. Daniel's loyalty, wisdom, and unwavering character made him shine like a beacon in a land of power and ambition. But not everyone admired Daniel. Among the other officials and administrators, jealousy burned like a slow fire. They resented Daniel's success and his favor with the king. Whispers of envy spread like shadows through the halls of the palace. They watched Daniel closely, hoping to find a mistake or a flaw they could use against him. But Daniel was faithful and diligent in all his duties. There was no corruption, no dishonesty, nothing that could tarnish his name. Frustrated, the officials gathered in secret. Their eyes glimmered with spite as they conspired to trap Daniel. "We will never find any fault with Daniel unless it has to do with his God," one of them whispered. They knew that Daniel's faith was the heart of his life. Every day, without fail, he prayed to his God 3 times, facing toward Jerusalem. This devotion, they realized, was their key to bringing him down. A plan formed in their minds, dark and cunning. They would use Daniel's faithfulness against him. The officials approached King Darius, their voices smooth and filled with false admiration. "O King Darius, live forever," they said, bowing low. "We believe you should make a law, a decree that will honor your greatness. For the next 30 days, let no one in the kingdom pray to any god or man except you, O king. Anyone who disobeys this law should be thrown into the den of lions." King Darius, flattered by their words, considered the proposal. It seemed like a way to unite his kingdom and affirm his authority. He trusted these officials and did not see the trap hidden in their suggestion. And so, with a steady hand, King Darius signed the decree. According to the laws of the Medes and Persians, once a decree was signed, it could not be changed. The news of the law spread quickly through the kingdom. Whispers carried it from the palace to the markets, from the fields to the city walls. Everyone knew that for the next 30 days, prayer to any god except King Darius was forbidden. When Daniel heard about the new law, his heart remained calm. He knew what the decree meant. He knew the danger. But he also knew his God. His faith was not something he could hide or abandon, not even for a moment. To Daniel, his prayers were like the very air he breathed. They connected him to the God who had been with him through every trial, every joy, and every sorrow. So, Daniel did what he always did. He went to his room, opened the windows that faced Jerusalem, and knelt to pray. 3 times a day, morning, noon, and night, he lifted his heart to God. His prayers were filled with trust, gratitude, and quiet strength. He did not pray loudly or draw attention to himself. He simply prayed as he always had, knowing that God was listening. But the officials were watching. Hidden in the shadows, they waited for the moment they could catch Daniel in his devotion. When they saw him praying, their eyes gleamed with triumph. They hurried back to the palace, their footsteps quick and eager. They stood before King Darius, their faces twisted with false concern. "O king, did you not issue a decree that for 30 days, no one should pray to any god or man except you?" they asked. The king nodded. "Yes, the decree stands. Anyone who disobeys will be thrown into the lion's den." With cruel smiles, they declared, "Daniel, one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king. He still prays to his God 3 times a day." The words struck King Darius like a blow. His heart sank. He realized he had been tricked. He loved and respected Daniel, and the thought of harming him filled the king with grief. All day long, he tried to find a way to save Daniel. He searched for loopholes, for anything that could undo the decree. But the law was unbreakable, and the sun began to set. At last, the officials came to the king. "Remember, O king, that according to the law of the Medes and Persians, no decree signed by the king can be changed." With a heavy heart, King Darius called for Daniel. The sadness in his eyes was deep. He looked at his faithful friend and whispered, "May your God, whom you serve so faithfully, rescue you." Daniel was led to the lion's den. The great stone door was rolled back, revealing the darkness within. The air was thick with the musky scent of the lions, their low growls rumbling like distant thunder. Their eyes shone in the shadows, fierce and hungry. Daniel stepped inside, his heart steady. He knew his life was in God's hands. The stone was rolled back over the entrance, sealing the den. The king pressed his signet into the wax, and the officials did the same. No one could interfere now. That night, King Darius returned to his palace, but he found no peace. He refused his evening meal. The music of the court musicians fell silent. He paced the halls, his mind consumed with worry. Sleep fled from him, and his heart ached for his friend. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, the king hurried to the lion's den. His voice trembled with hope and fear as he called out, "Daniel, servant of the living God. Has your God, whom you serve so faithfully, been able to rescue you from the lions?" A moment of silence stretched on, endless and heavy. Then, a voice rose from within the den, calm, steady, and filled with peace. "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel to shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight. Nor have I done any wrong before you, O king." Relief flooded King Darius's heart. His eyes shone with joy. "Lift him out of the den," he commanded. The stone was rolled away, and Daniel was lifted out. Not a scratch was found on him. The lions, who had been so fierce, had not laid a paw on him. He stood before the king, whole and unharmed, his faith as steady as ever. King Darius turned to the officials who had plotted against Daniel. Their own wickedness had sealed their fate. They were thrown into the lion's den in his place, and the lions, who had been silent before, showed their power now. Then King Darius made a new decree, one that echoed through every corner of his kingdom. People of every nation and language, fear and reverence the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will never be destroyed, and his dominion will never end. Daniel continued to prosper, living a life filled with courage and faith. His story became a light to all who heard it. The story of Esther who saved her people. Long ago, in the mighty kingdom of Persia, there was a young woman named Esther. Her life was simple, filled with quiet moments and gentle care, for she had been raised by her cousin, Mordecai, after her parents had passed away. She was kind-hearted, graceful, and beautiful, but her beauty was not just on the outside, it shone from within, a light of goodness and faith. The world Esther lived in was vast and powerful. The Persian Empire stretched across lands and nations, ruled by King Xerxes, a man of great wealth and authority. Yet for all its grandeur, the empire held many secrets, and within those secrets lay dangers hidden in shadows. One day, King Xerxes sent out a proclamation. He was searching for a new queen. His advisors gathered the most beautiful young women in the land and brought them to the palace. Among them was Esther. Though she was afraid, Mordecai told her to go, and he gave her one piece of advice. "Do not reveal that you are a Jew," Mordecai said softly. "Trust in God, and he will guide you." Esther listened and obeyed. She entered the grand palace, a world so different from her own. The walls shimmered with gold, and the air was filled with the scent of exotic spices and perfumes. Yet amidst all the luxury, Esther remained humble and kind. The women spent a year in preparation, cared for by servants and given treatments to enhance their beauty. When it was Esther's turn to meet the king, she went with quiet grace. She did not ask for special gifts or favor, only trusting that what was meant to be would happen. And when King Xerxes saw Esther, he was captivated. Her beauty, her kindness, and her gentle spirit won his heart. He placed the royal crown upon her head, and she became queen of Persia. But even in her new role, Esther did not forget where she came from. Each day, she listened to Mordecai, who often sat at the palace gate. He kept watch over Esther, his heart filled with love and concern. One day, Mordecai overheard two palace guards whispering in secret. Their words were filled with anger and hatred, for they plotted to kill King Xerxes. Mordecai's heart pounded, but his mind was clear. He sent word to Esther, who told the king of the plot. The guards were arrested, and the king's life was saved. The event was recorded in the royal chronicles, though no reward came to Mordecai. Time passed, and danger crept closer, hidden in the form of a man named Haman. Haman was a powerful official, second only to the king. But his heart was filled with pride and cruelty. He demanded that everyone bow before him, and when Mordecai refused, Haman's pride turned to rage. "Who is this man who dares to disobey me?" Haman sneered. When he learned that Mordecai was a Jew, Haman's anger grew into a dark, twisted plan. He did not want to punish just Mordecai, he wanted to destroy all the Jews in the kingdom. He went to King Xerxes with smooth, deceitful words. "There is a people scattered throughout your kingdom," Haman said, his voice dripping with false concern. "They do not follow your laws. It would be best to rid the kingdom of them." Without knowing the full truth, King Xerxes agreed. He gave Haman his royal seal to issue a decree: on a single day, all the Jews in the kingdom were to be destroyed. The news spread like wildfire. The people of Esther's faith were terrified. Mothers held their children close, and fathers looked to the heavens for help. Mordecai tore his clothes and covered himself in ashes, a sign of deep mourning. He stood at the palace gate, his cries echoing through the stone halls. When Esther's servants told her of Mordecai's grief, her heart was filled with sorrow. She sent clothes for him, but he refused them. Instead, he sent a message. "Esther, you must go to the king and beg for the lives of our people." Fear gripped Esther's heart. To approach the king without being summoned was punishable by death. Unless the king extended his golden scepter, she would be doomed. She sent word back to Mordecai. "Everyone knows the law. If I go to the king without being called, I could be killed. It has been 30 days since he has summoned me." Mordecai's reply was gentle, yet firm. "Do not think you will escape this fate just because you are in the palace. Perhaps you were made queen for such a time as this." The words settled in Esther's heart like a quiet flame. Her fear did not vanish, but courage rose within her. She sent her reply. "Gather all the Jews in the city and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days. I and my servants will do the same. Then I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." For 3 days and nights, the people prayed and fasted. Esther, too, spent the nights in prayer, her heart open to God. The weight of her decision lay heavily on her shoulders, but she knew she was not alone. On the 3rd day, Esther dressed in her royal robes. Her steps were slow, her breath steady. As she entered the king's hall, the air was thick with silence. Courtiers held their breath. Her eyes met the king's, and time seemed to stand still. King Xerxes looked at Esther, and his heart softened. He held out the golden scepter, and relief flooded through her. She stepped forward and touched the tip of the scepter. "What is it, Queen Esther?" he asked. "Whatever you desire, even up to half my kingdom, it shall be yours." "With grace," Esther replied, "if it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come to a banquet I have prepared." The king agreed, and Haman was summoned. That evening, they feasted, and the king asked again, "What is your request, Queen Esther?" Esther smiled softly. "Come to another banquet tomorrow, and I will tell you." Haman left the palace that night, his heart filled with pride. But when he saw Mordecai, who still refused to bow, his pride turned to fury. That night, he ordered gallows to be built, planning to hang Mordecai the next day. But God was at work. That night, King Xerxes could not sleep. He asked for the royal chronicles to be read to him. As the servant read, the king heard again of how Mordecai had saved his life. "What honor was given to this man?" the king asked. "None," the servant replied. At that moment, Haman entered the hall. The king asked him, what should be done for the man the king delights to honor? Thinking the king meant him, Haman described lavish rewards. "Dress him in the king's robe and let him ride the king's horse." The king smiled. "Do this for Mordecai the Jew." Haman's heart sank. He had no choice but to obey. At the second banquet, the king asked Esther once more, "What is your request?" With a steady voice, Esther revealed Haman's plot to destroy her people. The king's face darkened with anger. Haman fell to his knees, begging for mercy. But his fate was sealed. Haman was taken away, and the decree was reversed. The Jews were saved, and Mordecai was honored. Joy and celebration filled the land. Esther had faced her fear, and through her courage, her people were delivered. Her story became a testament to bravery, faith, and the power of standing for what is right, even when the path is dangerous. As you close your eyes tonight, remember the courage of Esther. In times of fear, there is strength within you, and you are never alone. The story of Moses confronting Pharaoh. Long ago, in the land of Egypt, the sun rose over golden sands and mighty pyramids. The great Nile River flowed through the heart of the land, bringing life to the fields and people. But amidst the beauty of Egypt, there was sorrow, deep, heavy sorrow. The Israelites, the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, were slaves. They toiled in the blistering sun, making bricks and building the grand cities of Pharaoh. Their cries of suffering rose to the heavens, carried on the wind, and God heard them. In a distant desert, far from the noise of Egypt, lived a man named Moses. He had once been a prince of Egypt, raised in Pharaoh's palace. But now, he was a shepherd, tending sheep in the quiet hills of Midian. He lived a life of solitude and peace, but deep within his heart, memories of his people's suffering still burned. One day, as Moses led his sheep near Mount Horeb, something caught his eye. A bush was on fire, but the flames did not consume it. The leaves and branches remained whole, though the flames danced around them. Curiosity and awe filled Moses, and he stepped closer. Suddenly, a voice called out from the midst of the fire. "Moses! Moses!" Moses froze, his heart pounding. "Here I am," he whispered. "Do not come any closer," the voice said. "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." Moses slipped off his sandals, his breath shallow. The voice continued, gentle yet powerful. "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." Fear filled Moses, and he covered his face. But God's voice was filled with compassion. "I have seen the suffering of my people in Egypt," God said. "I have heard their cries for help, and I know their pain. I have come to rescue them and bring them to a land flowing with milk and honey. Now, go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." Moses' heart trembled. The weight of such a task felt impossible. "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" he asked. God's voice was steady. "I will be with you." Even so, doubt filled Moses. "But what if they ask who sent me? What should I say?" God replied, "Tell them, I am who I am has sent me to you. The God of their ancestors has sent you. They will listen to you. And I will stretch out my hand and perform wonders in Egypt." Yet Moses still hesitated. "But I am slow of speech. I am not eloquent." "Who gave human beings their mouths?" God asked. "Who makes them deaf or mute? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, I will help you speak and teach you what to say." Moses still felt the weight of fear. But God, in his patience, said, "Your brother, Aaron, will go with you. He will speak for you, and together you will confront Pharaoh." Moses finally bowed his head in submission. He gathered his family, took his staff, and set out for Egypt. The desert stretched before him, but his heart clung to God's promise. When Moses arrived in Egypt, he met his brother Aaron, and together they went before the leaders of the Israelites. Aaron spoke the words God had given them, and Moses performed signs and wonders, showing the power of God. The people believed, and hope flickered like a flame in their hearts. Then, Moses and Aaron went to the palace of Pharaoh. The halls were grand, lined with marble pillars and golden statues. The air was filled with the scent of incense, but the atmosphere was heavy with power and pride. Pharaoh, seated on his golden throne, looked at Moses and Aaron with cold eyes. He was the ruler of the most powerful empire in the world. Who were these men to demand anything of him? Moses took a deep breath, his hand gripping his staff. Aaron stepped forward and spoke the words God had commanded. "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says, let my people go, so that they may hold a festival to me in the wilderness." Pharaoh's laughter rang through the hall. "Who is the Lord, that I should obey him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go." Moses' heart remained calm, anchored by God's promise. Aaron spoke again. "The God of the Hebrews has met with us. Let us take a 3-day journey into the wilderness to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God, or he may strike us with plagues." But Pharaoh's eyes hardened. "You are making the people idle. They are lazy, and that is why they are asking to leave. I will make their work harder so they have no time for such foolishness." Pharaoh's command went out, and the burden on the Israelites grew heavier. The people groaned under the weight of their labor, their spirits crushed. They turned to Moses and Aaron in despair. "You have made our lives worse," they said. "May God judge you for what you have done." Moses' heart ached. He cried out to God, "Why have you brought trouble on these people? Why did you send me?" But God's voice was steady, a rock amidst the storm. "Now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. Because of my mighty hand, he will let them go." God gave Moses and Aaron the courage to return to Pharaoh. They stood before him again, and this time, Moses raised his staff. At God's command, the staff became a serpent, slithering across the floor. But Pharaoh's magicians did the same, their staffs becoming serpents as well. Yet Moses' serpent swallowed theirs, a sign of God's greater power. Still, Pharaoh's heart remained hard. He refused to let the Israelites go. Then God told Moses to stretch out his staff over the Nile River. The water turned to blood, its surface dark and foul. The fish died, and the river stank. But Pharaoh's heart was unmoved. Plague after plague struck Egypt. Frogs swarmed the land, filling homes and beds. Gnats rose from the dust, biting man and beast. Flies darkened the skies, buzzing in endless swarms. Livestock died, boils broke out on the skin of the Egyptians, and hail rained down, shattering trees and crops. Locusts devoured what was left, and darkness covered the land for 3 days. Each time, Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh, saying, "Let my people go." And each time, Pharaoh's heart grew harder. But God's plan could not be stopped. Finally, after the last and most terrible plague, the death of every firstborn son, Pharaoh's resistance broke. His voice was weak, his spirit shattered. "Go," Pharaoh said. "Take your people and leave." Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt, their hearts trembling with wonder and relief. They were free, at last, after generations of slavery. The night was filled with the sounds of footsteps, whispers of hope, and tears of joy. As they walked into the wilderness, a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night guided them. God was with them, his promise fulfilled. And so, Moses' courage, strengthened by faith, led his people to freedom. His story became a beacon of hope, a reminder that no power on earth is greater than the power of God. As you close your eyes tonight, let the courage of Moses fill your heart. No matter how great the challenge, no matter how impossible it seems, remember that you are never alone. Strength and courage lie within you, and God walks beside you, lighting the way. The story of Elijah and the prophets of Baal. In the land of Israel, a long time ago, the people's hearts began to drift away from the one true God. Their king, Ahab, had led them astray, following false gods and bowing to idols. Queen Jezebel, his wife, encouraged the worship of Baal, a god made of stone and metal. Altars to Baal rose high in the land, and the worship of God grew faint, like a dying flame. The skies reflected the people's faithlessness. The heavens, once generous with rain, closed tightly. For 3 long years, no rain fell. The ground cracked, fields turned to dust, and rivers dried up. Crops withered, and the cries of hunger filled the air. The land, once lush and abundant, lay barren and desolate. In this time of drought and despair, there was one man who remained faithful. His name was Elijah, a prophet of God. His heart burned with devotion, his faith unshaken by the world around him. God spoke to Elijah and gave him a mission, a call to turn the hearts of the people back to the truth. One day, God spoke to Elijah. Go and present yourself to King Ahab. I will send rain upon the land." Elijah's steps were steady as he made his way to the palace. The sun scorched the earth, and the wind carried the scent of dust and dryness. But Elijah's heart was calm, for he knew he was not walking alone. When King Ahab saw Elijah, his eyes narrowed with anger. "Is that you, you troubler of Israel?" Ahab sneered. Elijah's voice was firm. "I have not troubled Israel," he said. "But you and your family have. You have abandoned the Lord's commands and followed Baal." Elijah's eyes gleamed with purpose. "Gather all the people of Israel. Bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah to Mount Carmel. There, we will see who the true God is." Ahab agreed, and messengers were sent across the land. From valleys and towns, the people of Israel came, curious and expectant. The prophets of Baal, dressed in fine robes, gathered with pride. The wind whispered through the trees of Mount Carmel, the mountain standing tall and ancient, waiting for the hand of God to move. Elijah stood before the crowd, his voice clear and steady. "How long will you waver between two opinions?" he asked. "If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him." The people were silent. They looked at the ground, unsure, their hearts caught between doubt and hope. Elijah spoke again. "I am the only prophet of the Lord left, but Baal has 450 prophets. Let's prepare 2 altars. One for Baal, and one for the Lord. We will place a bull on each altar, but we will not light the fire. Instead, we will call on our gods. The God who answers by fire, he is the true God." The people nodded. This seemed fair. The prophets of Baal prepared their altar first. They took a bull, cut it into pieces, and placed it on the wood. Then they began to call on Baal. "Baal, answer us," they shouted. Their voices rose into the hot air, echoing off the mountains. Hours passed, and the sun climbed higher in the sky. The prophets of Baal danced and chanted, their voices growing hoarse. But there was no answer. No sound. No fire. Nothing. Elijah watched them, his eyes calm. As the day wore on, he spoke with a quiet edge of humor. "Shout louder," he said. "Surely Baal is a god. Perhaps he is deep in thought, or busy, or traveling. Maybe he is sleeping and needs to be awakened." The prophets of Baal shouted louder, their voices desperate. They cut themselves with swords and spears, their blood mingling with the dust. But still, there was no answer. The sky remained silent. The altar stood cold and lifeless. As evening approached, Elijah stepped forward. The crowd, weary and filled with doubt, turned their eyes to him. He called the people to come closer. They gathered around, their hearts beating with quiet anticipation. Elijah repaired the altar of the Lord, which had been torn down. He took 12 stones, one for each of the 12 tribes of Israel, and rebuilt the altar with care. The stones, rough and weathered, held memories of the past. He dug a trench around the altar, deep and wide. Then he arranged the wood and placed the bull on top. "Fill 4 large jars with water and pour it over the offering and the wood," Elijah said. The people blinked in surprise. Water was precious in this time of drought. But they obeyed. Water flowed over the altar, soaking the wood. "Do it again," Elijah said. They did, and the water splashed onto the ground. "Do it a 3rd time," he said. The trench filled with water, and the wood was drenched. It seemed impossible for fire to burn here. Elijah stepped back, his heart calm and steady. He raised his eyes to the heavens and prayed, his voice soft but clear. "Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel and that I am your servant. Answer me, Lord, so these people will know that you are the true God, and that you are turning their hearts back to you." The air grew still. A hush settled over the mountain. Then, without warning, fire fell from the heavens. It blazed down like a bolt of lightning, bright and fierce. The flames consumed the offering, the wood, the stones, and the water in the trench. The fire licked up everything, leaving nothing but the echo of its power. The people gasped, their eyes wide with awe. Then they fell to the ground, faces pressed to the earth. Their voices rose in unison. "The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God." Elijah's heart swelled with gratitude. God had shown His power and His love. The people who had wavered in doubt now saw the truth. The darkness of idolatry began to lift, and hope glimmered like the first light of dawn. Then Elijah said to King Ahab, "Go, eat and drink, for there is the sound of a heavy rain." Elijah climbed to the top of Mount Carmel, knelt, and prayed. He sent his servant to look toward the sea. The servant returned and said, "There is nothing there." Elijah sent him back 7 times. On the 7th time, the servant reported, "A cloud as small as a man's hand is rising from the sea." Elijah smiled. He knew God's promise was being fulfilled. Soon, dark clouds covered the sky. The wind began to blow, and the heavens opened. Rain poured down, soaking the parched earth. The drought was over, and the land began to breathe again. Through Elijah's courage and faith, the people of Israel were reminded of the power and love of the one true God. The fire on the mountain and the rain from the sky were signs that God was near, ready to answer, ready to heal. As you drift off to sleep, remember the faith of Elijah. Even in moments of doubt and drought, the fire of faith can bring light. You are never alone. Strength and courage flow within you, and the God who answers by fire watches over you. The story of Paul and Silas in prison. In a time long ago, in the ancient Roman city of Philippi, 2 men walked the dusty streets. Their names were Paul and Silas. Their hearts were filled with a mission, to share the message of God's love and bring hope to those who felt lost. Their faith was strong, their courage unshakable. They knew they were doing God's work, and that knowledge gave them peace, even when danger lurked in the shadows. Philippi was a busy city, filled with merchants, travelers, and Roman officials. The streets were alive with the sounds of footsteps, chatter, and the clinking of coins. The air carried the scent of bread baking and spices being sold at the market stalls. Yet beneath this bustling surface, tension lay hidden. Not everyone welcomed the message Paul and Silas brought. One day, as they walked through the city, they met a young girl. Her eyes were weary, and her face was lined with a sadness that did not belong to someone so young. She was a slave, owned by men who used her for profit. The girl had a spirit within her that allowed her to tell fortunes, and her owners earned money from her strange gift. As Paul and Silas passed by, the girl followed them. Her voice rang out, loud and clear, "These men are servants of the Most High God, who are telling you the way to be saved." Day after day, she followed them, calling out these words. Though her message was true, her cries drew unwanted attention. Finally, Paul turned to her, his heart filled with compassion and resolve. He spoke gently but firmly. "In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to come out of her." At that moment, the spirit left the girl. Her eyes cleared, and for the first time in a long while, peace settled on her face. She was free. The weight that had bound her was lifted. But her owners were furious. Without her ability to tell fortunes, their source of money was gone. Their anger flared like a fire, and they seized Paul and Silas. Dragging them through the streets, they took them to the marketplace, where the Roman magistrates held court. "These men are causing trouble in our city," they shouted. "They are teaching customs that are against Roman law." A crowd gathered, the air thick with accusation and confusion. The magistrates, eager to keep the peace, ordered Paul and Silas to be beaten. Stripped of their cloaks, they were whipped with rods. Pain seared through their bodies with every blow, but they did not cry out. Their faith anchored them, even in their suffering. When the beating was over, Paul and Silas were led to the prison. The jailer, a stern man with a heavy heart, was told to guard them carefully. He took them to the innermost cell, a cold, damp place deep in the darkness. He fastened their feet in heavy stocks, the metal biting into their skin. The door creaked shut, and the sound of the key turning in the lock echoed through the stone walls. The cell was dark. The air was cold and musty. The only sounds were the distant cries of other prisoners and the faint dripping of water. Their bodies ached from the beating, their wrists and ankles sore from the stocks. Yet in that place of pain and confinement, a quiet strength filled Paul and Silas. Instead of despairing, they prayed. Their voices, though soft, rose into the darkness like gentle light. They spoke to God, their words filled with gratitude and trust. And then, they began to sing. Their voices, pure and unwavering, filled the prison with hymns of praise. The other prisoners listened, their hearts stirred. In that dark place, the songs of Paul and Silas carried hope. The melodies wrapped around the cold stone walls, softening the hardness in their hearts. The jailer, too, could hear the singing. He lay on his cot, his mind restless, wondering at the strange peace that seemed to flow from these men. Time passed slowly, but the songs did not stop. The hymns were like a river, steady and flowing, carrying away the fear and despair that lingered in the shadows. Suddenly, the ground began to tremble. A low rumble grew into a powerful shaking. The walls of the prison quivered, and the floor shifted beneath them. The earth shook violently, and with a mighty crash, the doors of every cell flew open. Chains snapped and fell to the ground, their clinking sound lost in the noise of the quake. Then, just as suddenly, the shaking stopped. Silence settled over the prison once more. The air was thick with dust, but the doors were open, and the prisoners were free. The jailer woke with a start. He saw the open doors and his heart pounded in terror. He thought the prisoners had escaped, and he knew the punishment for failing his duty was death. In his despair, he drew his sword, ready to end his own life. But a voice rang out through the dust and darkness. It was Paul. "Do not harm yourself. We are all here." The jailer froze, his breath caught in his throat. Trembling, he called for a light. A torch flared to life, casting flickering shadows on the walls. He rushed into the cell where Paul and Silas sat, still calm, their eyes steady with peace. The jailer fell to his knees before them, his voice shaking. "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" Paul's voice was gentle. "Believe in the Lord Jesus, and you will be saved, you and your household." The jailer's eyes filled with tears. Hope, soft and warm, bloomed in his heart. He led Paul and Silas out of the prison and took them to his home. He washed their wounds with tender care, his hands shaking with emotion. His family gathered around, and Paul and Silas shared the message of God's love with them. That night, the jailer and his entire household believed. They were baptized, and joy filled their home like the morning sun. The jailer, who had once guarded them with cold duty, now offered them food and kindness. Laughter and warmth replaced the shadows of fear. At dawn, the magistrates sent word that Paul and Silas were to be released. The jailer delivered the news with a smile, his heart light. But Paul stood firm. "They beat us publicly and threw us into prison without a trial. Let them come themselves and escort us out." When the magistrates heard this, they were afraid. They came to Paul and Silas, apologizing and pleading with them to leave the city peacefully. Paul and Silas left Philippi, but their message remained. The prison walls had been shaken, but so had the hearts of those who had heard their prayers and songs. Their courage and faith brought light into the darkness, reminding all who listen that God's presence cannot be chained. As you close your eyes tonight, remember the faith of Paul and Silas. Even in moments of pain, darkness, and confinement, hope shines bright. The songs of courage and trust can lift any heart, no matter how heavy. You are never alone. The God who shakes prison walls walks with you, bringing light to the darkest places. The story of Caleb's faith in the Promised Land. In the wilderness of Sinai, where the sands stretched endlessly under the sun and the nights were filled with cool breezes and a canopy of stars, the people of Israel wandered. They had left the land of Egypt behind, where they had once been slaves. Now, they were free, walking toward a promise that shimmered in their hearts like a distant dream, the Promised Land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Among the Israelites was a man named Caleb. His heart was strong, his eyes clear and determined. Caleb was not just a man of action, but a man of faith, a quiet, unshakable trust in the God who had led them out of Egypt and into the unknown. Though the journey through the wilderness was long and difficult, Caleb's faith burned bright, like a steady flame that refused to go out. The time had come to see the land God had promised them. The people had camped near the borders of Canaan, the land that lay waiting, rich and fertile. Moses, their leader, chose 12 men to go into the land and spy it out. These men were leaders from each of the 12 tribes of Israel. Among them were Caleb, from the tribe of Judah, and a young man named Joshua, from the tribe of Ephraim. Moses spoke to the 12, his voice calm and steady. "Go up into the land of Canaan. See what the land is like and whether the people who live there are strong or weak, few or many. Look at the cities, the land, the trees, and the crops. Bring back some of the fruit of the land so that we may know what awaits us." Caleb and the others nodded. The task was clear, and their hearts beat with anticipation. The 12 set out on their journey, their footsteps falling softly on the dusty earth. They climbed hills, crossed valleys, and walked through fields of tall grass. As they entered Canaan, their eyes widened with wonder. The land was beautiful, filled with rolling hills, fertile fields, and flowing rivers. Olive trees stood tall, their branches heavy with fruit. Vineyards stretched across the hillsides, and the air smelled sweet with blossoms and life. Caleb's heart swelled with hope. This was the land God had promised, a place of abundance and beauty. He could feel it in his bones. This was a good land, a land worth believing in, a land where their people could finally rest and thrive. The spies traveled for 40 days, observing everything. They saw the people who lived there, strong and tall, warriors with fortified cities. The walls of the cities rose high, and the men who guarded them looked fierce and unyielding. In one place, they even saw giants, the descendants of Anak, who stood like living towers of muscle and strength. But Caleb's faith did not waver. He remembered God's promise. The giants, the walls, and the warriors did not frighten him. God had delivered them from the mighty hand of Pharaoh. He had parted the Red Sea. He had fed them with manna from heaven and guided them with a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. Caleb knew that nothing was too great for God. As they prepared to return, the spies gathered fruit from the land. They cut down a branch bearing a single cluster of grapes so large that 2 men had to carry it on a pole between them. They took pomegranates and figs, their hands filled with the bounty of the land. When they returned to the Israelite camp, the people gathered around eagerly, their eyes filled with hope and curiosity. The spies displayed the fruit, the grapes gleaming in the sunlight. Murmurs of excitement spread through the crowd. "We went into the land you sent us to," the spies reported. "It truly is a land flowing with milk and honey. Here is its fruit." But then, their voices grew heavy with fear. "The people who live there are powerful. The cities are fortified and very large. We even saw giants there, the descendants of Anak." A hush fell over the crowd. Fear flickered in their eyes, and doubt crept into their hearts. Whispers turned into anxious cries. The promise of the land seemed to fade like a mirage in the desert. But Caleb stepped forward. His voice was strong and clear. "We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it." His words hung in the air, steady and unwavering. Caleb's faith shone like a beacon, his confidence resting not in his own strength, but in God's promise. But the other spies, except for Joshua, shook their heads. "We can't attack those people," they argued. "They are stronger than we are." They spread fear among the Israelites, saying, "The land devours those who live in it. The people there are giants, and we seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." Fear gripped the camp. The people wept aloud, their voices rising like a storm. "Why did God bring us here?" they cried. "It would have been better to stay in Egypt." But Caleb and Joshua tore their clothes in grief. They tried once more to speak to the people, their voices pleading. "The land we explored is exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, He will lead us into that land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and He will give it to us. Do not be afraid of the people of the land. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us." "Do not be afraid." But the people's fear was too great. They spoke of turning back to Egypt, of choosing another leader. Their faith had crumbled, like sand slipping through their fingers. God saw their lack of faith and their unwillingness to trust Him. Because of their fear, He declared that this generation would not enter the promised land. They would wander in the wilderness for 40 years, until a new generation, one with hearts willing to trust, was ready to enter. But God honored Caleb's faith. To Caleb, God said, "Because my servant Caleb has a different spirit and follows me wholeheartedly, I will bring him into the land he explored, and his descendants will inherit it." Years passed. The wilderness became home, a place of wandering and waiting. But Caleb's faith never faltered. He held on to God's promise, the vision of the land still bright in his heart. 45 years later, when the Israelites finally entered the promised land under Joshua's leadership, Caleb was there. He was 85 years old, but his strength was still like that of a young man. He approached Joshua, his eyes still filled with the same faith and determination. "Give me the hill country the Lord promised me," Caleb said. "I will drive out the giants, just as the Lord said." And he did. Caleb took possession of the land, the giants defeated not by his strength alone, but by his unwavering faith in God. Caleb's story is one of courage, endurance, and trust. Though the world around him shook with fear and doubt, his faith remained steady. He saw not the giants, but the promise. Not the walls, but the land beyond them. He knew that when God gives a promise, no obstacle is too great. As you close your eyes tonight, let the faith of Caleb remind you that promises are worth believing in. Even when the way is difficult and the giants seem too tall, remember that you do not walk alone. Strength and courage flow within you, and God's promises are sure. The story of Joshua leading Israel. After many years of wandering through the wilderness, the people of Israel stood on the edge of their long-awaited dream, the promised land. The sun rose over the plains of Moab, casting a golden light over the camp. The air was filled with anticipation and quiet hope. The time had come to enter the land God had promised to their ancestors. But their great leader, Moses, was gone. He had guided them out of Egypt, through the Red Sea, and across the wilderness. Now, a new leader stood before them, a man named Joshua. Joshua had been by Moses' side for many years, learning, growing, and trusting in the Lord. He was a man of courage and strength, not because he was without fear, but because his faith in God was unshakable. He knew the journey ahead would not be easy. The land was filled with fortified cities, strong warriors, and unknown challenges. But Joshua also knew that God had promised to be with them every step of the way. One morning, as the camp lay still and quiet, God spoke to Joshua. His voice was gentle yet firm, like a steady wind guiding a ship. "Moses, my servant, is dead. Now, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I am giving to the Israelites. I will give you every place where you set your foot, just as I promised Moses." Joshua listened, his heart beating steadily. God's words wrapped around him, filling him with peace. "No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life," God continued. "As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I promised to their ancestors." Joshua took a deep breath. The weight of responsibility lay heavy on his shoulders, but the promise of God lifted that weight. He knew he was not walking alone. "Be strong and very courageous," God said again. "Keep my word close to your heart. Do not turn from it, to the left or the right, so that you may be successful wherever you go." Joshua felt the warmth of God's presence. He stood taller, his resolve firm. The time to step into the unknown had come. He called the people together, their eyes filled with both hope and uncertainty. His voice, calm and steady, echoed across the camp. "Prepare your provisions, for in 3 days we will cross the Jordan River and take possession of the land the Lord is giving us." The people nodded, their spirits rising. They had wandered for so long, but now the promise was within reach. The days of wilderness were ending, and a new chapter was beginning. Joshua sent 2 spies ahead to scout the city of Jericho, the first challenge they would face in the promised land. The spies returned with news that filled Joshua with confidence. "The Lord has surely given the whole land into our hands," they reported. "The people of Jericho are melting in fear because of us." Joshua knew the time had come. He led the people to the banks of the Jordan River, its waters flowing swiftly and strongly. The people gazed at the river, their hearts uncertain. How would they cross this barrier? But Joshua knew God's power. He called the priests, who carried the sacred Ark of the Covenant, a symbol of God's presence among them. "Walk into the river," Joshua told them. "The waters will part, and we will cross on dry ground." The priests obeyed, stepping forward in faith. As their feet touched the water, the river stopped flowing. The water piled up in a heap far away, and the riverbed became dry. The people gasped, wonder and awe filling their eyes. They walked across the dry ground, their footsteps light with joy and amazement. When all had crossed safely, the waters of the Jordan flowed once more. The miracle echoed in their hearts, a reminder that God was with them, leading them into the land of promise. Now they stood before Jericho, its walls towering high, strong and impenetrable. The people's hearts trembled, but Joshua remained calm. He knew that God's power was greater than any wall, any army, or any fear. One evening, as Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing before him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua approached him, his voice steady. "Are you for us or for our enemies?" he asked. "Neither," the man replied. "But as commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come." Joshua fell to the ground in reverence. "What message does my Lord have for his servant?" The commander's voice was firm. "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy." Joshua obeyed, his heart filled with awe. He knew that God was in control. Victory would come, not through his own strength, but through God's power. God gave Joshua a strange command for taking the city of Jericho. They were not to fight, but to march. For 6 days, the people were to walk around the city once each day, with the priests blowing trumpets and the Ark of the Covenant leading the way. On the 7th day, they were to march around the city 7 times, and then, with a mighty shout, the walls would fall. Joshua relayed the plan to the people. Though it seemed unusual, they trusted Joshua, and they trusted God. Day after day, they marched. The sound of the trumpets echoed against the walls of Jericho. The people inside the city watched from the ramparts, puzzled and uneasy. What kind of battle was this? On the 7th day, the Israelites rose early. The air was filled with tension. They marched around the city 7 times, their hearts pounding. As they completed the final lap, Joshua's voice rang out. "Shout! For the Lord has given you the city." A mighty roar erupted from the people. The sound filled the air, rising like a wave. The walls of Jericho trembled, then crumbled into dust. The city lay open before them. God had delivered the city into their hands, just as he promised. The people entered the city, their hearts lifted by joy and awe. The promise was being fulfilled, step by step. Joshua led them with courage, not his own, but the courage that came from trusting God. In the days and years that followed, Joshua continued to lead the Israelites. They faced many battles, challenges, and obstacles. But through it all, Joshua's faith never wavered. He reminded the people again and again of God's faithfulness. Toward the end of his life, Joshua gathered the people one last time. His voice was filled with strength and conviction. "Choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve," he said. "But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord." The people answered with one voice, their hearts firm. "We will serve the Lord." And so, Joshua's life became a testament to courage, faith, and unwavering trust. He led with strength, because he walked with God. The walls of fear and doubt fell, and the promise was fulfilled. As you close your eyes tonight, remember the faith of Joshua. Even when the walls seem too high, the rivers too deep, and the challenge is too great, know that you are not alone. Courage flows within you, and the God who keeps his promises walks beside you. Thank you for joining us on this journey through some of the incredible stories found in the Bible. Please like this video if you enjoyed it and consider subscribing to our channel to join our community and for more videos like this. Now I wish you a peaceful and blessed sleep, and I'll see you on the next video. May God bless you.